Story 1. Deciding more judiciously when to bend over and pick something off the floor. Story 2. I used to be an unusually young member of the teams I worked in. Then I became average. Now they are all younger than me. Story 3. When high school students started being born the year I graduated. Story 4. I have shirts that are legally allowed to drink. Recovering from injuries takes a lot longer. I am not invincible. Story 5. Someone on Reddit posted a question. Older adults, what was it like being alive when the September 11th attacks happened? Story 6. For my 35th birthday, I bought myself a new fishing rod and my first pair of eyeglasses. Story 7. When people say I was born in and start with a number that begins with a 2, I was born in the 1900s. Story 8. When reading the local obituaries, I noticed that more than half of the deaths are people younger than me. Story 9. I bent over to pick up a dropped remote and simultaneously coughed and passed gas, which threw out my back and landed me in bed for 2 days lying on a heating pad. Story 10. Getting up in the middle of the night to urinate. Hair growing where it should not be. It is difficult getting older. Story 11. When you see someone looking kind of old but then realize you are the same age. Story 12. I was talking with a friend about him getting a job in New York City, and he replied, "Dude, they are not going to hire a nearly 60-year-old guy. In my mind, we are both still in our 30s. That was a big realization of time passing quickly. Story 13. When my daughter told me she ordered Taco Bell for dinner through DoorDash, she said it was only $30. $30 for Taco Bell through DoorDash for one person? Oh my goodness. Let me sit down for a minute. Story 14. Beard is turning gray, but it's just the beard for now, not the hair. Story 15. When I thought about how old some of my things are. Leather coat 30 years, wallet 35 years, tongue ring 26 years, ring 30 years, fridge magnet 40 years. That's when it all set in as being old. Story 16. Seeing Randy Orton, Rey Mysterio, Triple H, Batista, and The Undertaker getting old. Story 17. When new, young colleagues ask for my advice and then immediately disregard it because it is not fun. I warned you to keep change in your car for your 4-state car trip. Not every state has air pumps that are free or that accept credit cards. Story 18. Having to ask my daughter what abbreviated texts meant. I also found myself searching for newer terms I did not recognize. I am only 46. I do not know what happened. I used to know it all. Story 19. I work construction. I was at the laydown yard at the job site getting some material. There were 2 younger guys there too, early 20s at the most. I was loading some things into the truck when I heard one of them say, "Hey, go ask that original gangster over there." I was like, "What original gangster? There are only 3 of us here." "Oh, that is me." Story 20. Not being able to eat a bag of chips with some soda at night without it ruining my next day. Story 21. I taught a class of 4th graders last year, and they called me an older lady. I was 24 at the time. They also mentioned that they did not know what a Nintendo 3DS was because it is from before they were born. That surprised me a little. In my mind, the 3DS was from about 5 years ago at most. Story 22. It isn't really anything to do with me specifically. One day, I looked at my mother's hands and realized she had grown old, with spots and wrinkles I didn't recognize. I have never thought of myself or my mother as being old, but that was a difficult moment. Story 23. People from high school have started passing away due to health issues. Story 24. Staring out of my front windows for no reason, especially after I cut my grass. I do not want to leave my house and interact with people. I will be available at a reasonable 8:30 p.m. during the week and a casual 9:30 p.m. on the weekends. Story 25. About 5 years ago, I was driving with my father, listening to his oldies radio station, when Nirvana's "Smells Like Teen Spirit" started playing. I was perplexed and asked my father in an incredulous tone, "Why is Nirvana playing on the oldies station?" Dad replied, "Because this song is over 25 years old." It hit me like a ton of bricks. We were both silent for several minutes afterward. Story 26. Watching professional sports all my life and gradually becoming substantially older than most of the players, then older than the oldest players. I need a drink. Story 27. Years ago, when Britney Spears was interviewed by Catherine Corrick, I found Catherine more attractive. Story 28. Just happened recently. I was kicking my shoes off, using the toe of one shoe to pry the heel of the other shoe off. I twisted the wrong way and tore my hamstring tendon. It hurts a lot. 12 weeks of pain for taking off my shoes the wrong way. Story 29. All my students are using Chat Generative Pre-trained Transformer, and I am shaking my fist at them, telling them not to let the computers do their thinking for them. Story 30. Tore a calf muscle on the first point of a pickleball game, of all things. Story 31. When I was filling out a medical form, the answer to the question, "When was your last period?" was before you were born. Story 32. When my new work colleague told me her mother is younger than I am. Story 33. Turned and bent over to pick something from the garden and wrenched my back. Figured it would take a few days to heal. No, took a full month. Story 34. I had an old teacher in my school when I was around 9 years old. I reckon he was about 55 to 60 years old. Now my 9-year-old is in the same school, and the old teacher is the principal. So he is probably around 60 now, which means he was about 30 when I was in school, 10 years younger than I am now. Story 35. Walked into a store looking for jeans. Saw a pair with holes in them and thought, why would I buy a pair that's already damaged? Then I realized. Story 36. When someone asked if I was all right after falling instead of laughing. Story 37. I know everyone is talking about getting old in their 50s to 70s, but I just wanted to share a little experience of someone soon to be 18 years old. I started to not care. I don't want to care. 2 days ago, I was a kid. Now there is college and the future, and there are younger people in my family that I love who are not getting the care they need and deserve. Clicked for me when my mom got sick. Instead of just worrying about her, I was thinking about all the ways I would have to help my dad and how I would take care of my brother. Story 38. So I went back to college at 35. Last semester, in one of my classes, the topic of the September 11th attacks came up. My professor then said, anyway, most of you were not even born when that happened. That was my, oh, I am getting old moment. Story 39. Turning 50 and realizing that I have lived 25 years in 2 different centuries. Story 40. Today I am working with a man who is 22 years old. I have been working here for 23 years. Story 41. I had to read a serial number off a device and could not make out the number. I heard the help desk technician on the phone sigh, just like I did 20 years earlier. Story 42. First, I noticed football players were getting younger. Then I noticed leading men were getting younger. Then it was politicians. Story 43. Hangovers occur from 1 or 2 drinks, and I feel exhausted even at 2 p.m. the next day. Story 44. The first time I noticed a younger generation romanticizing the decade I grew up in, I realized I had done the same with my parents' and grandparents' childhoods. It was a strange experience, humbling and flattering, with a bit of, well, it wasn't exactly like that. Story 45. Someone called me ma'am from a respectful distance. I bought an elegant mop. Story 46. I stumbled and almost fell in front of some friends. Instead of laughing, they asked if I was okay. I was like, what the heck, man? Story 47. When I caught myself making that little grunt just from standing up off the couch. Story 48. Watching reaction videos of adults with beards who had never heard a Led Zeppelin or Fleetwood Mac song. Story 49. I'm 76, and I took a night school not-for-credit class at our local university in conversational Japanese. There were 4 16-year-old high school students in the class who were fluent in Japanese, and I was intimidated by their ability to quickly learn new words, phrases, and grammar. The teacher gave us a test on how to tell time. The test included drawings of clocks with their big hand and little hand showing the time. All we had to do was write down the times in Japanese. Easy, right? I aced the test. The 16-year-olds all failed because they could not read clocks. They said they just looked at their phones when they wanted to know the time. I felt old. Story 50. When the students in the new intake were legally young enough to be my children. This intake, we have one student actually a month younger than my eldest son. Sobs in old age. Story 51. Moving text away from my face to focus better. I remember my parents doing that when I was a child and wondering how they could see better at a greater distance. Story 52. Most of the people I graduated with are now grandparents. Story 53. Stood up to get off the couch and every joint simultaneously executed a bubble wrap popping maneuver hooked to a previously unknown surround sound system with such enthusiasm that the dog, passed out in the bed on another floor, started howling and came downstairs to find the intruder making the house shake, only to find me mid-crouch and deafened by the protests of previously truculent and argumentative, but never before engaged in the use of audio systems joints, muttering to both myself and said joints, "You can do it. Just a little further." This, of course, inspired the pup, himself completely unaware of the complications of uncooperative and rebellious joints, as the half-crouch is reserved for puppy play and tackle time. He leapt upon said papa, knocking him back into the couch, summoning an encore of the previous performance and startling the young canine, now perched upon the noisy, aged body of his parent, inspiring him to add his own vocals as earnest contributions to the general cacophony of my angry joints. Story 54. I kid you not, I used to babysit the head of urology at a major hospital. Another situation happened just yesterday. I was working on fermenting a mash and realized it had stalled. I went online for help and was told my yeast was stressed. My first reaction was to get angry at the yeast for being stressed in the first place. I almost threw the batch away, because I refused to accommodate its needy behavior. Took 30 seconds before I realized that was just an absolutely impulsive reaction. It made me understand that Generation X is rapidly morphing into the baby boomers, and I needed to check myself now before I become a monster. Story 55. I jumped off something that was not very high out of pure muscle memory. My body did not like that, though. I played it off like nothing happened. But internally, I was thinking, so I cannot do that anymore. Story 56. At the grocery store, waiting in checkout lines and looking at the magazine stands, not knowing most of the celebrities on the covers, with bonus points if it is a teenage magazine. Story 57. Back in the day when I got home from work, I would wave hi to the little next-door neighbor girl, continue through my front door to the back door, and go to my beer fridge for a cold one. On this particular day, I arrived to hear the little girl call to her mother, who was in their garden, "Hey Mom, old man Jackson is home." Story 58. Thought my foot was broken the past couple of weeks and finally went to the doctor. Arthritis in my toe. Sigh. I would much rather it be broken. Story 59. When I went to the supermarket to look for good deals. Story 60. When I saw an interview with my favorite musician with gray hair, wrinkles, and a calm voice instead of rebellion. That was when the realization came. Time passes for all of us, even for those you once imagined as eternal. Story 61. I saw snow was forecast and my first thought was about the inconvenience rather than building snowmen. Story 62. I used to have a pair of Airwalk shoes as a kid, which I wanted to buy again. I reasoned they were so popular they must still be for sale. I found them in the vintage classics section on their website, and so I was very excited. Story 63. I sneezed hard the other day and tore a muscle in my ribs. I had to go to the hospital and am now at home on strong painkillers because of a sneeze. Story 64. I had to use door handles to get up from the floor when kneeling to pick things up at work. Story 65. Things to remember when you are old. 1. Never trust flatulence. 2. Never pass a restroom. 3. Do not waste an erection. Story 66. I was taking a younger technician to my calls so he could see how the company did things. I played Red Hot Chili Peppers during a particularly long drive, and he said, "I really love classic rock." Story 67. When I get up, sometimes my back gets stuck. I used to dance and run fast when I was a child. Story 68. When someone who was 13 told me they had never watched a movie on a digital versatile disc before and did not know what a digital versatile disc was, it made me feel old because I still buy them. Story 69. As a joke, I asked for the smoking section at a restaurant, but the waitress did not understand. Story 70. Haha. The day the neighbor's kids across the street kept throwing their ball into my yard, and I felt like telling them to get off my lawn. I restrained myself but wondered if I was turning into that crabby old lady. Story 71. I am a high school teacher, and a student I had in the early 2000s is now 38 years old and on the board of education where I work. She was a great kid in school, and now she is my boss. When that happened, it hit me like an anvil. I am very proud of her, but it also made me feel much older. Story 72. My child said with a look of confusion and amazement, "You are from the 1900s?" Story 73. Someone stood up and gave his seat on the bus to a young lady. Story 74. Last week, I started building a cabin, thinking it would not be too hard since I built a large part of my house 15 years ago. A contractor will come in the next few weeks to finish the construction. Story 75. It's the body language of the people I interact with. In my culture, when younger people walk by older people, they bow slightly to show respect. Noticing people bowing as they walk by me makes me realize that I am old. Story 76. Well, after 4 honest attempts in my adult life, I now realize I am probably never going to have a partner, and I should just give up. I do not want to meet new friends at 58, and I do not see anyone in town that I am interested in anyway. So old and unhappy. Great. Story 77. When I accidentally pressed the rearview camera button and saw myself. Story 78. Had to have shoulder replacement surgery last year. On the positive side, it was the best decision I could make. 100% better. Story 79. When I told my children that I grew up before the internet was created. Story 80. 2 things. First, when I went to an antique store for old items, my childhood was waiting for me there. Game Boy, PlayStation 1, 2, and 3, Nintendo 64, all of which I still own, CDs in abundance, cassettes, Nokia cell phones that probably still have more battery life than my smartphone. Second, the radio stations that my mom used to listen to now play the music that I listened to when I was younger. Story 81. When it started to hurt getting up from sitting on the floor with my children. Story 82. When you can start talking about the past in decades, that is when you know things are getting real. Story 83. Someone posted on X that millennials are old, and I was like, wait, oh my gosh, I am old. Cue existential crisis. I am 47 and I just feel so young. Well, not my body so much lately. In my mind, I feel 21. However, I did have to get readers this year, which my husband instantly found attractive on me, so I guess that's good. I have to admit that when I think back to the fact that I grew up without the internet with landlines, tape decks, Pac-Man, and Atari, I just might be a little old. Story 84. I am only 22, but the language that younger people use surprises me every time. Story 85. When my daughter referred to my clothes in the attic from my high school days as vintage, it must be noted that I graduated high school in 2000. Story 86. I discovered that orthopedic shoes are actually comfortable. I am getting old. Story 87. Here is one that is going to hurt us all. I had a young 20-something I work with ask me a question about the late 1900s. I was born in 1984, and hearing that caused physical pain. Story 88. When I realized that scoping out college guys was more perverted than welcome, it crushed my old gay heart. Story 89. Seeing my friends buy a house at 21, and I am still wondering how I will pass my next test. Story 90. Diabetes complications hit me hard when I turned 30. Story 91. I do not understand my little sister at all. One time, she brought her friends over for dinner, and I understood only 10% of the whole conversation. Story 92. The day I started to leave the grocery store, a slim-waisted, clear-skinned, bright-eyed woman in her 20s opened the door for me. Story 93. When I noticed, I opened my mouth too wide and stuck my tongue out too far as soon as the spoon left the soup. Story 94. When women no longer gave me a big, authentic smile upon meeting me, I thought that was normal. Turns out it was just youth. Story 95. I injured my shoulder while sleeping and had to go to physical therapy. It is still painful. Story 96. I got a cup of coffee at Dunkin' Donuts. The cashier gave me a senior discount without even asking. That was a good day. Story 97. I used to be the youngest one in the room. Now, a supervisor of mine asked me if, back in my day, it was cool to make fun of Nickelback. Then there is the intern. I look at least a decade older than I really am, so I asked them if they could guess how old I was. They said, 47. I am used to that level of estimation, so I said, you are about 10 years off, kiddo. Their response, so you are 57? I had actually just turned 37. Story 98. I just had surgery, and the surgeons, staff, and doctors were all younger than me. Felt like I was being cared for by a group of recent college graduates. Story 99. I just bought Gears of War Reloaded and got curious when I played the original game, as I am feeling nostalgic right now. The original game was released in 2006, almost 20 years ago. That realization hit me pretty hard. Story 100. Children born in 2010 are sophomores in high school. I feel very old just hearing about that. Story 101. Late 1990s working in the motor tax department. Jesus Christ, people born in 1980 are getting driving licenses? Ridiculous. Story 102. I was in a young person's bar and dressed nicely but age-appropriate. They thought I was the manager. Story 103. You cannot just party until 5 a.m. and go to work the next morning anymore. Story 104. When I have to turn down the radio to concentrate on driving directions. Story 105. Whenever a movie from your youth is being remade, you are officially old. Story 106. When I noticed that my beard was starting to go gray in my early 40s, I did not mind it, but I certainly noticed. That is when it hit. Story 107. Honestly, I stopped recognizing the celebrity hosts and musical guests on Saturday Night Live. Story 108. When I accidentally booked a hotel in the wrong state. Similar city but wrong state. I regret to inform you that I did this not once but twice within just a few days. Ugh. Story 109. The moment I realized adults in their 20s look like little kids now. Story 110. When I told people my first deployment was the first Gulf War, they did not know what I was talking about. They did not care either. Story 111. When I mentioned with $10 I can get a full tank of gas, 3 combos at Taco Bell, and still have change left over. Story 112. Meeting children who do not remember the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic. Also realizing that I am old enough to have shopped at a Kmart. Story 113. I had to get up on a flat roof to retrieve a device one of my technicians put there to run some tests. I got it, and as I was trying to get down, I dangled my legs and had about a 2-foot drop, which felt like a 6-foot drop and knocked the wind out of me. I am almost 36 and nowhere close to being overweight, but definitely out of shape. I had an awakening moment that drove me to exercise and get in shape, mainly focusing on cardio and flexibility. The first thing I noticed is that I don't make old people noises when I bend down. I also have more energy to do things. The point is, don't slip into comfort. It's fine to sit all day and do absolutely nothing, but you feel better if you work out or do any physical activity. Story 114. Being in a sitting position for a long time and feeling the effort it takes to stand up. Story 115. Going to bed before 9 p.m. Making noises when getting up from a chair or bending over. Waking up hurt. Finding hair in unusual places. Not understanding the new fads or slang terms. Story 116. When I saw the commercial for the Video Music Awards and did not know any of the guests. Story 117. Go back into pickup hockey. Went to be goalkeeper like I have done a couple of times. Injured my medial collateral ligament on the first save. Story 118. I get excited when the washing powder is 10% off at the local market. Story 119. Needing reading glasses and eyesight generally. I used to have 27 vision, now 20/15, so still good, but I cannot comfortably read a book or my phone without glasses at all. Story 120. Finding gray hairs coming in the mohawk I had been growing for half my life. I finally shaved it off shortly after. Story 121. This is my 20th year working in education. I have taught secondary school for over a decade and spent the rest of my career as a principal. I decided to return to the classroom this year, teaching first and second grade. It is also the first year that I am teaching the child of a former student. Story 122. I went to the doctor because I noticed some unusual spots. The doctor told me they are just a natural part of aging. Story 123. Slept in an awkward position and woke up with severe back pain. Could not move without experiencing agony for several days. Story 124. You start to feel sore or even pull muscles doing your easy workout routines. Story 125. I volunteer with children, and one of them mentioned something that happened during my childhood, specifically in the late 1900s. I felt my knees go stiff at that moment. Story 126. My wife and I were at a vintage shop looking around when a younger man approached the owner with an old Playboy magazine. He was examining it and asked what the centerfold was. The owner gave him a side glance to see if he was joking, but he was serious. He had never heard of this icon from the past. After his explanation, I told him I had never felt older than at that moment. The owner agreed, and we all shared a good laugh. Story 127. Arthritis in my shoulder is frankly a real bummer. I used to switch sides in my sleep during the night between the left side and right side, but now the right side quickly becomes very painful. After a few weeks of this, my body thankfully stopped automatically turning. Story 128. Since I turned 30, several things happened. 30, I had a severe burnout. It coincided with my breakup, but my brain chemistry was depleted. At 31, something happened, but I forgot at the moment. 32, I had an ulcer on my eyeball. It was very painful. At 33, I forgot my passcode to my phone. It was horrible. I couldn't log in and almost got permanently locked out. At 34, I hurt my back from carrying an icebox for my birthday party. I couldn't leave the couch for a day. I actively work out and lift weights, but I guess it was just the wrong movement. I feel old writing this now. Story 129. I caught myself talking about remembering when they built the highway and where the old roads used to go. I realized I had turned into my dad. Story 130. Realizing people born in the early 2000s are actually adults. Story 131. A few months ago, I had to pause and think for a moment to remind myself of my own age. Story 132. When the children in the family study the events you experienced as history. Story 133. I picked up some litter that was not mine and took it home to put in the bin. Story 134. Children do not know what a commercial is anymore. They know advertisements, but not a typical commercial. Story 135. In my late 40s, I worked and got along very well with a teenage colleague at work. I saw him as my little brother. One day, his parents came to visit him at work, and he introduced me to them as his work aunt. It was definitely eye-opening. Story 136. When a teenager walked past me into a shop and said, "Excuse me, ma'am," I looked over my shoulder before I realized he meant me. Story 137. When I realized that I do not understand TikTok trends anymore, I have no idea why these 3-second videos go so viral. Story 138. I coughed and my back popped. I used a walker for 3 days. I am 40 years old. Story 139. Talking to my coworkers in their 20s who were not alive during September 11, 2001. Story 140. How were the 1900s different? Asked an inquisitive student born in 2011. Story 141. I have started disliking new technologies rather than being fascinated by them, particularly generative artificial intelligence. Story 142. Not being able to see in the dark and not easily remembering all of my passwords. Story 143. Got super excited about my new vacuum cleaner. Crime show television and drama are suddenly more interesting than action and fantasy. My niece is a teenager, and I no longer understand most of her references or values. Generation Z perceives The Matrix as a really old movie. Story 144. When songs I listened to as a young adult are playing on the background music at the grocery store. Story 145. High school classmates are now grandparents. I am 41. The guys I considered teen heartthrobs back in the day now play the fathers of current teenage heartthrobs. Story 146. I went to breakfast at Bob Evans this morning and noticed how only elderly people eat there anymore. Then I looked in the proverbial mirror. Story 147. I work in a kitchen, and on weekends we have a few teenagers. We all go on lunch break together, and I have a youthful sense of humor and hobbies, so I enjoy chatting with them throughout the day about anime and video games. I also look very young for my age, so while I get along with most people, I tend to be grouped with the younger employees. One weekend, we were all on break, and what started as a one-time crude joke from one of them turned into a discussion about intimate topics, which made me very uncomfortable. They kept trying to encourage me to join, but I just sat there awkwardly. I finally had to say, "Guys, I know we joke around, but I am at least 10 years older than you all. This is not a topic I can join. Can we please talk about something else?" I have always worked jobs with diverse age ranges and often found myself between the older and younger groups, but for the first time, I wanted to hang out with the 40-year-old parents discussing their children. Story 148. Walking downstairs and my knees hurt for no reason. Jumping on the trampoline with my children and realizing I physically could not bring myself to go from a leg bounce to a butt bounce. In my heart, I know it would not hurt, but my head was saying, "You will put your back out. Do not do it." Getting older is realizing you will hurt yourself with minor things like that. Totally caught me off guard. Story 149. The new employee at work was born the year I proposed to my wife. The new employee at work did not know what a busy signal on a telephone sounds like. My father has been gone for almost half my life. Feels like he passed away yesterday. Story 150. When I slipped and nearly fell, people around me were genuinely frightened, and nobody laughed. That hurt much worse than the twist in my ankle. Story 151. I saw an advertisement for a movie and thought, that looks like Tom Hanks's son Colin. Years ago, while watching Orange County, I was amazed that this huge movie star from my era now had a child starring in his own movies. He looked like a baby Tom Hanks, like Muppet Babies but for people. Recently, when I thought I might be seeing Colin Hanks again, I realized there was no way Colin could be playing this young man in an action role. He's not that much younger than I am. This guy looked fresh out of basic training, whoever he was. Somehow, it wasn't the first time I saw the child of a beloved film star and felt old. It was realizing that nowadays it would have to be the grandchild of a famous film star playing a grown adult I just saw. Story 152. A child asked me for help. I said, "Let's find you an adult." Story 153. When I had to start looking for my readers if I wanted to entertain myself. Buskill. Story 154. Riding on the playground swings makes me dizzy. Now I am pushing my nephew as he says, "Higher." Story 155. Gray hair. I'm a strange one and don't see age or color for some reason. I'm not sure if it's because of autism that I have no idea. But I was incredibly shocked one day to realize I have a full head of gray hair. Then I started thinking about how old I was. I've been a bit depressed for a couple of months now. I don't feel old. I'm more comfortable with younger people than older people. All my friends say that I have an innocence that other people don't have. I honestly think it's because my brain doesn't know it's old and doesn't know how to think that way. I also don't realize how much time has passed. 20 minutes or 20 years still feels like yesterday. Story 156. When I walk past younger people, teenagers and those in their early 20s, I stop and have a remember those days moment. Story 157. I was washing some bowls while talking with my son. I realized the bowls were older than him. He is in his mid-40s. Story 158. When I realized that almost every future movie I saw as a kid was set in a time that has already long passed. We are living in the year the original Terminator was sent back. Story 159. I am a supervisor in a casino and conduct many identification checks. Occasionally, people's birth dates are the year I graduated high school or later, and they are allowed to play. Story 160. The great comedian Billy Connolly said, "You know you are getting old when you make a noise either getting up from a chair or bending down to pick something up." I realized I have started doing this in the last couple of years. Story 161. When I decided to let my beard grow out and it was so white, everyone kept calling me Santa. Story 162. I am older than most television fathers now. I realized that Homer was younger than me. Story 163. My sister died of coronavirus disease in the first wave in 2020. Our parents were long gone, and our brother died at 66. I am the sole survivor. Call me Ishmael. Story 164. I am currently watching Motorheads with my wife, enjoying the main characters. The flashbacks to their parents remind me of our own childhood as well. Story 165. Free tickets to WrestleMania were being given as a prize at Blockbuster. I commented that I went to WrestleMania 4, and the clerk addressed me formally by my last name, adding that it was 20 years ago. Story 166. Played pickleball for the first time and fell flat on my behind. I used to be able to maneuver. Story 167. There has always been this oldies radio station. I was driving and scanning stations when I stopped at a good song. Sweet. Someone bought the oldies station and changed the format to good music. Nope. The oldies station just decided I was old. And this was their way of informing people. Story 168. I have been working in my career longer than my assistant has been alive. Story 169. I'm a teacher. 3 years ago, I had second graders say, "Wow, you're older than my mom." Story 170. All my joints hurt, especially when it is cold outside. Also, why can't I straighten my arm when it is above my head? The doctor says I have a partially frozen shoulder. Great. Story 171. When I realized I would rather invest in tools and courses than spend hours partying, suddenly adulting hits hard. Story 172. When I looked in the mirror and saw an old man I did not recognize. Story 173. Getting a boot in the head in 1993 and 1994 by a body surfer in the mosh pit at a Nirvana concert when I was in my 30s. I said, I am getting too old for this. Story 174. When I did not recognize any names in the list of performances for the Video Music Awards. Story 175. I was just watching Practical Magic. I realized I was older than the ants. Story 176. Last December, when I was hiking, I walked up a hill really fast and congratulated myself. A few minutes later, I realized my right leg was hurting. I figured it was just a cramp and that I would walk it off. I could barely walk for the next 2 months. I was taking a work break because I was studying for the bar exam, so I had no insurance. I can walk now, but when it is a long distance, it starts to hurt. I suspect it is a bad hamstring pull just from walking fast up a steep hill. Story 177. I was 29 years old last year when I sneezed while sitting slumped in my chair. Felt like something snapped in my ribs. After getting checked, I found out I had bruised my rib pretty badly. The first 2 weeks were unbearable. During the first days, I just slept in my office chair to avoid lying down because trying to lie down was extremely painful. After a few days, I could finally lie down in bed again, although getting out took about 5 minutes of motivating myself to endure the pain. After 2 weeks, the pain was manageable but persisted for at least another 2 months. Fortunately, I work from home, so even though it was painful, life continued. Story 178. I am friends with someone who was born when the PlayStation 3 was already released. Story 179. Checking the ingredients on the food label to avoid severe diarrhea. Story 180. When I had to hold things farther away from my face to read them suddenly despite being nearsighted. Story 181. A song that was very popular when I was in high school is now on the oldies radio station. Story 182. Years ago, in my car, when some 1980s music came on the radio, my younger brother, who is 10 years younger than me, said, "Leave it, I love the oldies." Legend has it he is still walking home. Story 183. When I realized I had my grandmother's hands, which is actually not a bad thing, we had and have long, elegant hands. Story 184. I say this in sincerity and truth. When you fall and people laugh, you are still young. When you fall and people get really concerned, you are in trouble. Story 185. When driving around, seeing these children who look about 12 driving their own cars, I think to myself, there is no way that kid is old enough to drive. Story 186. The injury that does not quite heal right reminds you of what happened at the end of every day. Story 187. The phrase, "what a nice young man," went through my head after a store associate assisted me with something. Story 188. When I heard The Cure on the radio and then realized it was an East listening station. Story 189. Remember the video with the father and son where the father was playing a trombone and the son was slamming the oven door? The son is now a 21-year-old man and has moved out. Story 190. When the children I used to babysit started getting married and having babies. Story 191. When I watched a hockey game, the players were younger than me. Story 192. I have refereed soccer since I was 16. I recently officiated a game with players who were not born when I started, and half of them drove to the game. Story 193. Knowing that I am as old as the original Ben 10's first episode, which was released in 2005. Story 194. My childhood music is now considered throwbacks and classics by Generation Z and Generation Alpha, specifically artists like Linkin Park, Simple Plan, Good Charlotte, and Green Day. I still listen to them today, but to be fair, hearing "I'm Just a Kid," the anthem, or "Jesus of Suburbia," while being in my 30s is still good, but it doesn't have the same effect as it used to. Story 195. The first time someone I work with said the year they were born and that I had graduated college by then. Story 196. I just finished a book where the main character mentioned watching an old animated movie with her mother. That movie was Wall-E. Story 197. When I was close to retiring from the military, I realized that some of the people I served with were born after I joined. It has only gotten worse since then. Story 198. I'm at a bar, listening to a band I like. It's outside, too cold, too loud, and too smoky. I'm tired, Grandpa. Story 199. The one that keeps getting me lately is realizing some things in my life that I remember well when they happened were more than 20 years ago, and I know that will get worse as I age. Story 200. When I got excited about receiving a handheld vacuum for Christmas. Story 201. Sevens are turning 18. They are supposed to be 12 years old. What is going on? Story 202. I slept on my shoulder in a strange way and thought I had torn my rotator cuff for a week. Story 203. Seeing a commercial about an appliance and thinking, "Ooh, that's nice." Alternatively, feeling excited when your grocery store gets new varieties. Story 204. I am only 21, but I am slowly starting to dislike teenagers already. Story 205. Last December, my goddaughters were visiting and Mariah Carey's "All I Want for Christmas" came on. One of the girls, in her early 20s, exclaimed, "Oh, I love the old standards." I said, "What do you mean, old standards? That's Mariah Carey." Her reply still haunts me. Yeah, from like 30 years ago. Mariah Carey is to this generation what Bing Crosby and the Andrews sisters were to us in the 1980s, because the 1990s are as far back to them as the 1950s were to us. Old. Story 206. When my doctor gave me a pill, he said to take one every day for the rest of my life. Story 207. I was driving and suddenly became aware of very small young people driving. For a while, I thought many children must be stealing cars. Then I realized I am in the age bracket where young people look really young to me now. Story 208. I was filling out a form that required entering our birthdays. I was confused why the years started with 2, considering all participants should be 18 or older. Story 209. When I wanted a cordless handheld vacuum and spot wash for Christmas. Story 210. Ran into a student I taught in 5th grade. He is now in university. I felt old for the first time. Story 211. When I realized that Tim in Jurassic Park is also John Deacon in Bohemian Rhapsody. Story 212. Ran into my nephew in a nightclub. Just hand me my walking stick already. Story 213. Realizing that I have been playing video games for over 40 years. Story 214. 2007 was 18 years ago. Babies born in 2007 are adults in my country now. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.